Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today to speak about museum and entertainment. I've been creating a foundation, a private foundation for contemporary art in Western Africa, in Benin, in 2005. Why would I do such a thing? Quite easily, because I was teaching in a class at that time with 40 children wanted to know about art history. And so I started speaking about art history, and very quickly I realized I was speaking about Occidental art history, and that it was time to come to African history and to contemporary art and what was happening today in our country and on our continent. Very quickly I realized there was absolutely no way to show them actual creation. There was no space. There were no space, either in Benin or in Togo or in Senegal. I couldn't find a place where I could show them creation. So I tried to look where I could bring them and to what kind of space I could bring them. And very quickly I realized the most important exhibition with Beninese artists about African contemporary art was in Düsseldorf, in Germany. So obviously having 40 children in Abomey-Calavi next to Cotonou in Benin, it was impossible to bring them to Germany to understand what was happening on their continent. And so it gave me the idea to start a space. So in 2005 we started, and very quickly it was my first experience. I had never tried to create a museum before, and it was everyone brought some ideas, but the first thing I had to face was people telling me, actually, African people don't go to museums. That's why there are no contemporary art museums. And I thought maybe it's the opposite. Maybe people don't go to contemporary art museum because there are none. So we started trying to understand how people would come to us, and we opened our door. And very quickly we realized that people were not coming because they didn't understand what we were there for. They would enter, but then they would go out in a minute. And when we asked them why, they would say, because it's empty. You have no office, you have no people. And we would say, okay, look at the walls. Maybe you'll see something. Maybe you'll see the paintings and the sculpture and installations. And very quickly we realized that people could not really understand who we were, because we were not, their parents didn't go to museums, and they were not going because there are absolutely no museums in the economic capital. So where people live, we were 10 million at that time, and 1.5 million were living in the capital city. But nobody would realize, nobody could go to a museum because there were none. So we started, the first week, some children came, realized that it was quite funny to come to us and see masks from Romuald Azoumé and pictures that would ring a bell because it were pictures taken in Benin. And so they started to understand that they could have fun at the museum. So we tried to do little games, Q&A, leaflets, very traditional ways of interesting those children. And very quickly, we had a new idea, which was quite different. It's like, if you are at home, you're not expecting anyone to visit you if you don't know anyone. You have to go and introduce yourself. You have to go and tell who you are and why you would make friends with people. So very quickly, we decided we were meant to go out of the museum. So we started exterior exhibitions, which was not very classical. We decided to show the art in the streets, in the most crowded streets where people would come, and try to explain who we were and invite them to come to our museums. So that was the first idea of how do we become an entertaining space, and how do we create relationships with our audience, and how do we reach out to people that would never come to see us. And so it was obviously very impactful on children, and their parents started to come quite quickly. So we decided to make it a fun space. Why would the museum be a boring space where you learn, but it's very traditional? And we decided to try to change the code. When you came to a Basquiat show, we decided to do a treasure hunt. what noise can you find in a Basquiat painting? And so children would run around all over the exhibition trying to find the noise of the painting and come back and would earn a present or a picture of a Basquiat drawing, something like that. So we tried to change the way people would look at the institution. And very quickly, people came a lot. We had 6.5 million visitors in the last 15 years. So we were really quickly overcrowded. And we realized that after a few years, after 6 or 7 years, we realized social media would be very impactful for our museum, because if we had opened our space in Benin, there was still no space for contemporary art in Togo, in Burkina Faso, at the time in Ghana, there was no space. So we had to work on that, and we thought maybe social media could give us the opportunity to reach out to other African countries and to more people on the continent that would probably be very interested, but the states didn't understand that the funding of culture was absolutely essential in developing countries, as in other countries. And private people would still be a little careful about creating spaces. So we decided that social media would be a way to entertain people, which was kind of a complicated exercise at the beginning, because we were facing entertaining brands who had a lot of money and a lot of communication budgets. So we had to try to find new ways to interest people with local content and cultural content. And it worked quite well. We have a lot of people coming on our Facebook and on our Twitter and our Instagram. So we decided to reach out differently to people and make like WhatsApp was kind of one of the best way to speak with people. So we tried to use companies' ideas on the museum to make it to make people understand who we were and why we were there. And so after a few years, we started thinking it again. In 2006, we were given the opportunity to show works from the Museum of the Quai Branly in France, which were actually Beninese objects, but who had been taken during colonization. And working on this exhibition, we realized that the kings in Dahomey, the name of the former kingdom that is Benin today, the kings of Dahomey had something called annual customs. Annual customs was the big event of the kingdom, where all the population would go to the capital, Abomey, and would celebrate for a few days around the king and all the court. And so we realized that one of the most important things at that time was discovering the royal collections. The king would put all the population in the courtyards of the palace and get all the most important artworks from the palace, walking on women's head, on Amazon's head, around the population and showing the art to everyone. And so we realized that even though we didn't invent the museum in the 18th century, in the 18th and 19th century, we had a tradition of public demonstration of collections. And so today we are facing the fact that Occidental museums have a model, as it has been shown everywhere, proved everywhere. But we are thinking about the future and thinking of how could we bring something else? What is our future? Where are we going? And how do we impact the people that live around us? And so that was one of the most important questions that we asked ourselves after having discovered this tradition of showing art publicly. Can we get inspired by our tradition and redefine the Occidental museum models that we've been using for years? And today is a very important moment, because the question of restitution is on the table. Will European countries restitute the artifacts that have been stolen during colonization to Africa? Today, France has decided to start the move, and Germany is thinking about it too. And so I think that today our role as a museum is to probably stop thinking only North giving humanitarian help to the South, but more like how do we create a dialogue? We see children who are 8 years old in Benin, and we have children of 8 years old in Germany. Those children don't have to be impacted by the worst parts of our common history. They don't have to be only impacted by slavery and colonization. We have a real question today about how do we see our future together? How do we cooperate? And how can we imagine that we don't feel condemned by our common history? But how do we imagine how museums can help us define a new relationship? And probably the question of entertainment in museum will be key, because children of both continents who will be interested in those museums, who will feel free, will feel in the discussion, probably those children can invent tomorrow's relationships. So I feel really happy to share about all those things with you in the deep dive in a few minutes.